Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. I want to thank you all for being here with me today for another hand history video. This is from a $5,000 buy-in World Series of Poker event that I played last year that I ended up final tabling. Be sure to look at the previous parts of this video. You don't necessarily have to watch them, but you might as well. So we're playing 1,200, 2,400 now. I have 250,000 chips, and an unknown 35-year-old has 64,000 chips. We are actually nearing the bubble. I don't remember exactly what the bubble was, but we were probably within 3 or 4 or 5 eliminations from being in the money. So I get pocket tens in the big blind, and the unknown 35-year-old player makes it 5,200 from second position out of his 65,000 chip stack, 63,000 chip stack, something like that. And with pocket tens in the big blind, this is a scenario where a lot of players just somewhat mindlessly re-raise and try to get it all in, or just try to make their opponent fold. But you have to recognize, a lot of players who have relatively shallow stacks, and in this tournament, we did start with 25,000 chips, so he has 60,000, 63,000, which is 2.5 starting stacks. That sort of implies that if we are nearing the bubble, average stack should be about 250,000, because usually 10% of the field gets in the money. If that is the case, then he's relatively short stacked. Maybe we started with 15,000 chips. I'm pretty sure we started with 25, but if it was 15,000 chips, then he has 5-ish starting stacks, 4.5 starting stacks, something like that. And even then, that's still relatively short. So be aware of that. Whenever players are short, they typically play tight on the bubble. So if he's playing tight, do I really want to re-raise and get it all in with pocket tens? I would say definitely not. I think if I re-raise and my opponent is willing to get all in, he's probably going to have an incredibly strong range that has tens in somewhat bad shape. I could re-raise and then fold if he goes all in, but I think we're better off just calling and trying to get a set, or calling and trying to get an overpair. So I do call. Flop comes Jack, Jack, 7, 2 spades. I have the 10 of spades. That is relevant. I check, and my opponent bets 5,000. I don't think there's any merit in betting into my opponent. I think that's going to allow him to play incredibly well. So I like checking, and I'm just going to check call this flop. Of course, my opponent could have a jack and have me crushed. He could also have aces, kings, or queens and have me crushed. But at the same time, he could also have ace, king, ace, queen, ace, 10, king, queen, etc. So I think folding in this spot would be a little bit too tight. Also notice that he bet 5,000 into the 15,000 chip pot. So you just cannot fold to a 1/3 pot bet in this scenario. Turn is a 4. I check, and my opponent now bets 11,200. So he's betting a little bit larger, about 40% pot. And at this point, I actually don't think folding would be so horrible. And that's mainly because, what is this guy really representing? Do I think most unknown 35-year-old players on the bubble in a $5,000 event, do I think they're going to be running bluffs versus someone who has a lot of chips, who they probably perceive to be at least a competent player? I just don't think that people are bluffing here that much. So if he's value betting, what is the worst hand this guy is going to value bet? And I really don't know. It's probably going to be something like pocket 8s or better. So I beat pocket 8s and pocket 9s. I lose to pocket jacks. I lose to pocket 7s. I lose to pocket 4s. And I lose to aces, kings, queens. He may randomly bet ace, king here for no real reason. You will see players just somewhat mindlessly bet in spots like this with ace, king. A lot of people get ace, king and vastly overvalue it for many reasons. But if I got the vibe in game that this player was particularly strong, I would have just folded. And I'm not a big fan of making big folds, but this seems like a reasonable spot to make a big fold. If I do call this turn and my opponent goes all in on the river or bets the river for any reasonable amount, I probably am going to fold. River's a 7, so now the 7 on the river doesn't really change anything. I don't think this guy's raising too many 8-7s under the gun, or second position, sorry. So I'm just sticking with the same plan. If he bets this river, I'm going to fold. And if he checks, I expect to win most of the time, but even then, maybe not even every time. He may check behind with pocket queens or something. So it does go check, check, and he has pocket kings. So that's unfortunate. So could I have done anything differently in this pot? I think the only way I realistically could have lost fewer chips is just by folding the turn. But it's relatively hard to fold versus anyone in a $5,000 tournament, because you have to realize most players in $5,000 tournaments are competent enough. It's not like anyone in these tournaments they all have a clue of what they are doing. No one is bad, right? And is a random unknown 35-year-old guy going to run a big bluff in this spot? And I would venture to say absolutely not. So maybe I could have made the fold there. I think my opponent played his hand well. He got 2 streets of value. I think if I was in my opponent's shoes, I actually would have bet the flop and then checked behind on the turn. Because notice if I have a jack, by betting the turn, my opponent sort of allows me to put him in a horrible spot. I could have check raised the turn. I don't know if he would have folded pocket kings, but by betting the turn, he allows himself to get stacked, right? By checking, you do open yourself up to getting outdrawn sometimes if I happen to have a spade draw. But at the same time, you get me to bluff with random stuff that I may have. And also, you will still get the same amount of value from the pairs like I have on the river, because you can check, I'll check the river. He can then bet, I'll then call my pocket tens, so he'll win the same amount. Or I'll either bet the river, and he will call, and I will lose the same amount. I feel like I maybe got my words mixed up there, but that's okay. You guys get what I'm saying. So this is a scenario where if I'm in my opponent's shoes, I'm more so trying to protect my stack than maximize value. And I think by checking the turn, you give yourself much easier scenarios where, worst case, you're losing half of your stack. Whereas here, if I just check raise the turn and my opponent decides to call it off, now all of a sudden he could get stacked. So that's going to be it for this episode. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Jonathan Little, and check out my personal website at jonathanlittlepoker.com. I post a blog and a podcast there each week. And make sure to check back next week. I have one more hand to share with you from this $5,000 buy-in World Series of Poker event that I final tabled. So be sure to check that out next week. Thanks for watching.